Greetings and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be discussing my 7 steps to getting started with your backyard garden. 2 years ago, being forced to stay home, I took up the hobby of gardening. I'm a software engineer and I really love the outdoors. I think that gardening is a really great way to get some exercise, fresh air, and a satisfying sense of progress with your plants. If you're a white-collar worker like myself, I highly recommend you start a backyard garden. I believe humans were made to work a garden. And I don't think it's natural for us to be inside all day on the computer. I want to be honest though, gardening isn't easy. It's dirty and difficult work. Gardening also isn't just for homeowners. In the past, I've done patio gardening in containers, and you can get started at your own pace and budget. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's really all just part of the learning process. Step 1 is going to involve doing some research local to your area. Almost all of these steps are going to be like that. So, step 1 is figuring out your garden zone. Sometimes these are also referred to as hardiness zones or USDA plant hardiness zones officially online. A hardiness zone, defined by this Wikipedia article here, is a geographic area defined to encompass a certain range of climatic conditions relevant to plant growth and survival. So that's a long way of saying that a hardiness zone generally categorizes the minimum average temperature for a region. I live in Austin, Texas, or at least an Austin, Texas suburb city called Manor. So my garden zone is zone 8B. If you look at this map here, circled in red, that's zone 8B. So as you can see here, it's a huge area of the entire country. Zone 8B's minimum average temperature is about 15 to 20 degrees. That means that that's not the lowest temperature of the year. As if you're from the area or from somewhere in South Texas or Central Texas, you'll know that during the winter of 2021, it's kind of a weird way to say it, in February of 2021, we had lows in the single digits. It was 1 degree at my house at one point. So these aren't the lowest temperatures, these are the minimum average temperatures. The reason it's important to know this is down the line, we're gonna be picking out what kind of plants we're gonna grow. Certain plants are suited to different zones. You wouldn't want to plant a tropical plant in the ground outside if you get snow in the winter. So that makes step 1 just figuring out what kind of garden zone do you live in. When I recorded this, I also neglected to mention the wide diversity of areas in this garden zone, zone 8B. So you'll see this is most of the southeast and huge parts of Arizona, Nevada, California, Oregon, and Washington. The regions here can vary wildly. This all garden zones tell you is the minimum average temperature. For example, West Texas is a desert. It is super inhospitable. There's very low amounts of water. It's extremely dry. You can't really grow almost anything out there besides cactus and agave. The winter lows will be well below freezing. The summer highs are easily in the triple digits. And then East Texas is really fertile farmland. So you really have to do some research into what kind of things you can grow in your area. That brings us to step 2, researching what grows in your area. So there's a couple of ways I did this when I got started with gardening. I would just go to local nurseries. Local to Austin, Texas, that would be like Barton Creek Nursery, Green and Growing in Pflugerville, and a couple of others, and just speaking with experienced gardeners on what they've grown. If you've been watching the channel for some time, you'll know that mostly I do fruits and vegetables. I don't do a ton of ornamentals, but visiting a botanical gardens or speaking with an experienced gardener can give you a good idea of what grows there. Of course, I've also grown a lot of tropical plants in containers. The beauty of containers is that during inclement weather seasons, you can take them into the garage or something, but really this is a lot of labor, and it is best to find local native plants that just do well in the gardening environment you're working with. So a couple of ornamentals I've had some success with in Austin include crepe myrtles. You'll see them all over the place. They're these really colorful trees. Sweet potato vines, of course, anything you'd find at a hardware store. If that's not true, not anything. I was thinking about like tulips, angel trumpets, all sorts of Texas wildflowers, things like bluebonnets, crimson clover, bachelor buttons, which are sometimes also called cornflowers. And of course, being Texas, lots of desert plants, agave, century plants, and cactus, although I don't really like growing cactus. Really anything you would see your neighbors growing or you might find at a botanical gardens is probably something that would fit your zone really well. Step 3 is mapping out your garden. Now, of course, you can just plant where you'd like and kind of improvise to build things the way you want them to look as you go along, but I think the most appropriate way in designing your backyard garden is to map it out before you start digging. I explained why really well in a previous video.
Before we get started talking about this anymore, I wanted to explain why I chose this location. My backyard isn't huge, but it's, I think, bigger than most. And you can see my house over there is casting a shadow. Well, in the winter, the sun rises over there and kind of runs along that southern border. That's obviously the south. And so my house casts a shadow which gets longer and longer as we approach December 21st. And this is the only spot of the yard that's in the sunlight all times of year. So that's why I chose it.
As I just explained, while aesthetics matter and putting your plants where you want to see them is really important, what's more important is that your plants, which are full sun plants, get full sun, and that your plants, which are partial sun, get partial sun. So if you're starting your garden in late spring, you're going to want to keep in mind where the shadows might lengthen in the winter. It's also helpful to draw a map of where you're going to plant your raised bed or garden plants. As you can see here, this is a map of some of my fruit trees in my raised bed. I didn't specifically write down the different types of species in my raised bed. This is really important if you want to keep in mind what you're growing if you plan on leaving stuff in the same spot for years to come. Step 4 is budgeting for your garden. So if you're a new homeowner, we all know homes are really expensive these days, you might not have a lot left over to start your garden, and it's easy to bite off more than you can chew. If your budget includes $15,000 of steel bins, pine, soil from a soil yard, stones from a rock quarry, and a whole bunch of fruit trees, you might need to go back to the drawing board with step 3 for your garden map and just take them in little steps. As you can see on the screen here, this raised bed cost me about $1,000, and I spent probably about $2,000 or $3,000 at my previous home in my backyard garden just doing various projects. Most of the expenses are on the front end, but you're going to want to make sure you don't bite off more than you can chew. Step 5 is preparing your gardening space. So, one of the reasons I decided to build this raised bed is because I'm working with really dense clay soil. The soil in my backyard possibly could be amended, but it's just so dry and dense and has such poor drainage that I thought it'd be a better idea to just build this raised bed and fill it in with some quality soil and compost. So, a better way to do this would have been going to a rock quarry or a soil yard and getting this was almost 3 or 4 cubic yards of soil. I just didn't want to tempt my HOA by having a big pile of soil on my brand new home's front yard. Didn't want to erase any suspicion of these projects I'm doing in my yard. But here I am making a video of it, so I don't know. Anyway, you're going to want to make sure that the area you're growing your plants in is very nutrient-rich, positive soil for your plants. Of course, there's more specifics that you could get into with this. pH levels of the soil, alkaline levels of the soil. But this is a video for gardening for beginners, so I'm just going to say, get some nice, good, nutrient-rich soil from a soil yard. This is everybody's favorite part, actually planting your garden. I had these starters that I grew inside under a grow lamp and supplemented them with some seedlings from various nurseries and hardware stores, and you're going to want to make sure that these are spaced out appropriately. That's different depending on the different kind of plants that you're growing. So I had some strawberries, tomatoes, and cucumbers, just each one set aside with about 1 foot or 2 of space, and my cucumbers spaced out about 6 inches around this lattice. Of course, depending on what you're growing, you're going to space them out differently, but you can basically just space them out however you'd like and learn from your mistakes. Finally, step number 7 is doing some research on pests and diseases which can cause your plants to die or not yield a full crop. So for example, check out this peach tree I grew a year ago.
We're running into problems like this. You can see this peach here has a hole in it. There are certain fruit-boring insects, like here, that are eating into the peaches and probably laying eggs and stuff in the peaches. So we're gonna have to be very careful as we sort through them to make sure we separate the good from the bad and we wind up with good peaches.
Pests and diseases are issues which will impact pretty much anything you want to grow, from ornamentals to fruits and vegetables. For example, this raised bed full of cabbage and cauliflower that I planted last winter grew for a little while, but eventually got infested with mites, and after a really bad cold snap, some sort of fungus took over, and all of my cabbages and cauliflower died. If this happens to you, don't sweat it. You can always just start over. Part of the hobby of gardening is just learning from your mistakes. Those are my 7 steps to get your backyard garden started. Now, of course, they're not easy steps. Gardening as a science is called horticulture and is very complicated. Each plant and biome you might be working with has a ton of things that you can learn about, and so I recommend getting started today. Of course, this is a gardening YouTube channel, so if you want to learn more about gardening, I recommend that you subscribe and stay tuned. I'll be continuing to make gardening videos about things that I'm growing here in Zone 8B, and also some tropical stuff that doesn't really grow in my zone, but I'm trying to grow it anyway. Once again, thanks for watching everybody, and I will catch you in the next one.